Good day, my fellow Fulani brothers and sisters, and welcome to Shakal Fulba TV. I am your host, Hannah Ibrahim. Today, we're shining the spotlight on grazing reserves in Nigeria. Join me as we delve into this very important topic. What is grazing reserves? Grazing reserves are areas set aside for the use of pastoralists, intended to be the focus of livestock development in Africa's most populous country called Nigeria. Similar to group ranches, they have clearly defined areas of rangeland to provide grazing for certain herds of livestock. Grazing reserves in Nigeria began in the 1950s, following a study of the Fulani production system contained in the Fulani's Amenities proposal. This proposal suggested creating grazing reserves, improving Fulani welfare, and transforming herds management in the northern region. In 1965, the Northern Nigeria Legislative Assembly enacted the Grazing Reserve Law, providing legal grazing rights and land titles to pastoralists. This law aimed to respond to increased pressure on traditional grazing lands by smallholder farmers in the region.
That's when we talk about grazing reserve, that has been causing a lot of controversy around the country. Grazing reserve is a land set aside by government for herdsmen to hold and graze their cattle. Now, this has raised lots and lots of questions from people across the country as to why will there be a grazing reserve set aside by government? But certainly, if on one hand, the people are saying, well, we don't want the cattle to come into our farms, the other argument is saying, why not create a grazing reserve and create this, and so that they have a certain place they can settle and then they go grazing. But this plan has been met with stiff resistance, like I said, from so many Nigerians. The establishment of grazing reserves is, however, not the brainchild of this administration. Nigeria tried the concept as far back as the pre-colonial era. I'd like to take you to those days. Now, it started in the 1950s. Now, that's former grazing reserves in Nigeria started in 1950s. Was supported by the government. The grazing reserve scheme was initiated from the abandoned government resettlement schemes. And certainly, if you take a note about by 1964, now the government had set aside about 6.4 million hectares of forest reserve aside, 98%, and that's about 98% Savannah, which is in Sokoto, in Bauchi, in Kaduna, in Kwara State, Katsina, Zamfara. These are some of the states that house just a few of the reserves in the country. Now, if we move ahead, we see that later in the year, the Northern Nigerian government incorporated the Fulani Amenities proposal into grazing reserve law, and certainly that was by 1965. And by 1992, the identification of 28 million hectares for grazing reserve development was one area that it was raised up a little. So the activities really started in 1992, and cattle farming is a very lucrative business worldwide, but most countries no longer have grazing reserve but ranches. But certainly if you see across the world, if you look at the world, in Southern America, in parts of Central America, in parts of Europe, and even in parts of Southern Africa, people now talk about ranches and not grazing reserves, as the case may be. But coming to Nigeria, the modern day practice in Northern and Southern America, Australia and Europe is to raise cattle in ranches where grazing pasture and other dietary requirements are planted for the consumption of animals. But if you take it back to Nigeria, there's a lot of controversy as far as this is concerned. Now, how do we make the people understand what these things are?
Under the grazing law, pastoralists are encouraged to settle within the reserves, where feeds and water are provided year-round. They also enjoy access to veterinary and extension services, helping to prevent or minimize clashes between herders and farmers. According to Akoli Solomon Chiloka, 2022, Nigeria has 415 grazing reserves across 21 states and the Federal Capital Territory, covering 4.4 million hectares. However, only 141, 34% of these areas are gazetted, leaving 274, 66%, vulnerable to encroachment. Most grazing fields in the northern region have been taken over due to encroachment, desertification, and lack of development. This has led to internal migration of herdsmen seeking grass and water for their cattle. Newton Jibuno, founder, Fight Against Desert Encroachments in an exclusive interview stated that
people have not been able to combat this encroachment. And of course, with the encroachment comes desertification. And the rate with which this is moving has brought about migration of the people to lands where they can find some greenery. And by migrating to just anywhere where they can find greenery for their animal herds, for them to practice their normal way of life, which is basically farming, means encroaching on other people's land, to a point where we are beginning to have series of conflicts. From the 16 conflicts that we have in Africa today, 11 of them are as a result of migration. People migrating into their farmland, their green areas. And when people migrate into your farmland, just because they want to graze their animal herds, what do? You fight back. And before you know it, those little fights escalate into civil war. And so that is part of the problem that I have tried to address in various summits.
However, some state governments, such as Sokoto, Adamawa, Yobe and Kano, are taking steps to develop and utilize grazing reserves. The Yobe state government has spent over 1 billion naira on developing a grazing reserve.
If you have like 200 to 300,000 heads of cattle, you can imagine the milk production you will get. Assuming maybe even 30% of them are calving at the same time, you have about what percentage? Well, about 30% are calving. A lot of milk production there. So it's a basic raw material needed for these small industries like this, yogurt factories and all that. And even if you are going to do beef production, large number of cattle in one place will improve the production, especially now there is a veterinary clinic there, they will improve the health and the production of the animals.
Another important facility is the aqua dam. It is constructed to encourage fish farming and large production of fish within the grazing reserve.
For those that are interested in fish farming, we have made about 10 fish ponds there, and it's a pilot. So those that are interested will continue from there, and then if there is need for us to even build more, we can do that. We are now finishing the fish ponds. So we built a borehole close by to continually supply water there. And we are going to buy fingerlings, to encourage people that are interested in fish farming.
All these are measures by the Yobe State government to minimize or stop crises between elders and farmers. To maintain the greener pasture of the reserve, the Ministry of Agriculture deemed it fit to plant and frequently water the green area for all-round freshness. The landscape of the reserve is a beauty to behold due to its greener pasture. These are the leaders and traditional rulers of villages within Jakusko community. Many of them are cattle rearers and owners.
Grazing Reserve, one of the 32 gazetted grazing reserves in Adamawa State, with total land area of 9,600 hectares. The reserve has the potential to house thousands of herds of cows and other animals with diverse comparative advantages.
We are one of the few states with minimal farmer-herders clash. We usually have an interaction between our farmers and herders. And each program we want to conduct will invite both parties. And the demarcation of these grazing reserves have helped us in minimizing such crises. Because we demarcate a place, and before we do that, we will have a meeting between the farmers and the herders, and that this is the limit of each and every one of you. And with that, you don't have a problem. You see, the major challenge we are having is not providing the Fulani to have access to feed and water. In these grazing lands, we plant pastures and we provide water as earth dams, which they will use in doing their business. Now, a farmer has no business in going to any grazing land to graze, to farm. We have taken adequate measures by setting up committees at various levels, both local and state levels, to monitor encouragement of these facilities.
On their part, at the federal level through the Ministry of Livestock Development, created under the current administration, had held a meeting recently which aims to ensure that all grazing reserves in Nigeria are been reclaimed and utilized effectively.
Practicing livestock farmer with all sense of humility, I'm not oblivious of the challenges facing this sector. From limited and high cost of quality feed to disease outbreaks, farmer-herders conflict, overgrazing, aging stock, climate change, limited access to credit facilities and modern technologies and inadequate infrastructure, just to mention but a few. These are significant hurdles, yet I believe they are not insurmountable.
The minister also announced that the ministry will validate 417 grazing reserves across the country to ensure that all essential amenities and resources are available for livestock to thrive in designated areas.
Once these grazing reserves are available, have no legal encumbrances, and are suitable enough for us to regrass and make all the necessary amenities and fundamentals of life for the livestock to remain in one area, this is exactly what we want to do, and we believe this is a panacea, a permanent solution to this problem.
However, experts emphasize that ranching in Nigeria must be driven by the private sector, with government support only. On their perspective, the pastoralists believe that expanding grazing reserves in Nigeria will boost livestock populations, reduce herding difficulties, and enhance interactions among farmers, pastoralists, and rural dwellers.
The national body of the Mate Allah Cattle Breeders Association believes only proper demarcation of the routes can mitigate the challenge.
Let those state governments who have grazing reserves in their state begin to pave way, reclaim those routes that link one grazing reserve to another, so that we can come over this farmer-herder conflict that was allowed to degenerate into cattle wrestling, later kidnapping and banditry.
However, many Fulani herders lack access to these reserves due to insufficient development or climate change. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Shackle Fulba TV, and share your thoughts on ensuring sustainable grazing practices and resolving scarce grazing reserves to end farmers-herders conflicts in Nigeria. See you in the comments section. I'm Hannah Ibrahim, and we'll see you another time.